I've come to talk about art and solidarity and what that means to me. Though it took me a wee while to work out exactly how to frame that. But as I'm still currently collating a lot of my work for the Spirit of Revolt archive, it seemed like a good place to start with my input as an artist over the last 33 years or thereabouts. Now, this is not some nostalgic or even sentimental thing, but an important aspect of how we contribute and write our own histories and ensure they are represented appropriately and as accurately as possible. I want to cover a pretty wide range of things and give you a summary rather than any deep analysis. So, to begin with, a bit of context and a short history. Oh, right, okay, that's gone too far back. So I'm going to fast forward from the 1960s, yes, that is my age range, to the 1980s. Prior to 1990, I was still at art school here in Glasgow, but also one of a number of young artists who were breaking into the previously inaccessible art world, tearing up the unwritten ruling that students are not worthy to have exhibitions in public. We were angry with the art establishment, had things we wanted to say, but wanted to say them on our terms. We said, fuck the gallery system. We wanted to curate ourselves and self-organise. Some of us might even have called ourselves anarchists if we had really known what that meant. The kind of artwork I was making was large-scale, site and situation-specific installations, durational performance, and mixed media, textural drawings and paintings. The content was always issue-based, highlighting topics like animal vivisection and testing, intensive agriculture, waste, recycling, and climate change, before it was even a currency as a term. Before I'd even graduated in my early 20s, I had shown work in Paris, Arnhem, London, and all around Glasgow. I'd had solo shows in Transmission Gallery and the Glasgow Arts Centre, been commissioned to create a brand new performance piece at the Third Eye Centre. This is now known as the CCA. Had curated shows with other artists, was helping run a gallery, started an international exchange programme, had received various awards, been given press attention, and the future looked promising. A year or so later, I'd pretty much chucked it all away. Why? Well, the short version is I got quickly disillusioned with the growing elitist attitudes of my peers, their developing arrogance, and their disappearing politics. The direction this new art scene was following seemed to me to be replicating all that was previously loathed by us. Backroom deals with private galleries, collectors and curators, internal cliques, rather than a wider spirit of collaboration. It seemed that we didn't want to change the art establishment, but merely wanted to become it. That, along with a growing undercurrent of entrepreneurialism, just rang alarm bells for me. In the end, a lot of the folk in this group would go on to be nominated or win Turner Prizes, rewrite art history books, become international art stars, and would effectively, if not intentionally, invent the term the Glasgow Miracle. That was not for me. I walked away. It's not true, I fucking ran away. As I withdrew from some of these projects and was starting to be disenfranchised from others, I was already finding my own direction. My eyes were being opened to a whole new world as I ventured along to anti-poll tax demos and attended free university events. I was about to become involved with a worker city group. Oh, and I just met Noam Chomsky. Early in 1990, I attended a self-determination and power event in the Pearce Institute in Govan, coordinated by the Free University, the Edinburgh Review, and Scottish Child magazine. The keynote speaker was Noam Chomsky. At that time, I'd not even heard of him, and the first memorable interaction I had had with any anarchists was observing some heated discussion about the lack of vegan grub, a mystified caterer producing a cheese roll in one hand and a bacon butty in the other, to the dismay and rolled eyes all around. And I'm probably the only person in Glasgow who admits he didn't have a pint with Chomsky in Brecken's bar opposite the PI, but I did actually meet him in company during the event. But it was at this event that I had a revelation about solidarity, and as I was hanging about in the main hall chatting to some folk at the end of the first day, somebody was busy stacking chairs. I can't quite remember whether I offered to assist or was asked, but I ended up helping to clear up the place, while all the other folk went off to the pub to discuss the important affairs of the day. The person stacking the chairs was one of the event coordinators and writer James Kelman, and it dawned on me that all the little seemingly unimportant facets of this event were actually the crucial parts. It wasn't the deep philosophical discussions or even the workshops on the future of libertarian socialism, but the everyday, commonplace infrastructure. That was the common sense that dawned on me that day. Don't wait to be asked, but get stuck in with the work needing done regardless. No chairs equals no event. I've never been to or been involved in an event since where I haven't automatically been drawn to the kitchen to make up the usually vegan rolls, sweep the floor, wash the dishes, or stack the bloody chairs. A few months after the Chomsky event, I had a large-scale installation on show in the city centre. This was entitled Cultural Facade, and it was constructed 3 stories up in an old derelict warehouse showroom building in Queen Street. This would later become the infamous Archaeos nightclub and is again derelict, I believe. At this time, Glasgow was under continual renovation. The term gentrification was not common currency then. Up the road, the Buchanan Galleries was still a gap site. The Style Mile had yet to be invented. The buses were bright orange, and the District Council colour scheme was bright green and yellow. Out of scrap wood, I built a full-size skip and some mock advertising billboards, hung wallpaper on the walls, filled bags with rubbish, and hung up fairy lights, all in the council green and yellow colours. I even managed to blag the actual paint from the council works department. I reappropriated the font used on the council vans and made up my own texts, the most telling being City of Capitalism. I also had a flyer with other pertinent quotes taken from a mixture of sources, including the book The Reckoning by Worker City. At heavy cost to the public purse, Glasgow's image is to be overhauled and tarted up so that financial services can flourish. Upmarket shopping malls thrive and high-priced luxury flats proliferate to the glory of capitalism. Behind the cultural facade and gloss of the 1990 phenomenon lies the political and social wasteland. What has been celebrated, what has been presented as a celebration of art in all its diversity has become an actual assault on the artistic and cultural life of the city. Prior to 1990, I already had at least a partial understanding of the corrupt style of politics and policies that the local council employed. Mayfest was a month-long festival of arts and culture throughout the city. It ran annually from 1983 to 1997, approximately. Apart from the benefit as a skint art student being able to attend what was effectively a week-long free drinking binge at various art openings, back-to-back, there was lots of interesting art on show. However, as I entered the arena of arts funding and grants, it became quite apparent that the local council cared little for artists and arts organisations. They effectively stated that if you're an artist, then apply for funding during Mayfest. Otherwise, tough. There was little or no money available at any other time of the year. This same bullshit argument applied during and shortly after the European Capital of Culture, except this time community arts organisations were effectively shut down completely to fund temporary big budget art exhibitions. And from the council it was, an artist? No money left, pal. You had your chance in 1990. Now fuck off. Or at least words to that effect. For me, red Clydeside had turned a distinct shade of blue. The writing was on the wall, or in this case, the window of the Macintosh building during my postgraduate degree show. Around about this time, I had been introduced to the Workers' City group by one of my then art contemporaries, Ross Sinclair. I started going along to meetings which were held in the Scotia Bar and then later on in Transmission Gallery. Workers' City was the name of a book published in 1988, in part antidote to that year's transient event, the Glasgow Garden Festival. And from that grew a bunch of folk drawn together by their disgust at what was happening next at the City Chambers. The prestigious accolade of Glasgow being awarded European City of Culture. An award usually means you gain something, but in this case, the opposite was going to occur. It should be pointed out that the name Workers' City came about essentially not from a workerist ideology, but as a fairly blunt reaction to the rebranding of the city centre as the Merchant City. The fact that a supposedly left-wing council were content to commemorate slave traders in this way was, for some, a step too far. Also during this time, I started to retrain and refresh my skills in screen printing at the Glasgow Print Studio. printing posters, booklets, and stickers, though always having to do this on the sly, as it was not seen as art, but as some sort of alternative enterprise. Political slogans and the aesthetics of certain graphic designs were deemed unworthy of support by an art establishment. I persevered and learned to print out of sight. As a side note, the old print studio, when it was based in Ingram Street, used to be more than supportive of this approach to mixing art and politics. By 1990, the Workers' City Group had a number of folk directly involved, including Hugh Savage, Tommy Kays, Les Foster, Brendan McLaughlin, Norrie Bissell, Ned Donaldson, Farquhar McClade, Jim Mackay, Billy Clark, Jim Kelman, and many others supporting it in a number of ways. A number of these folk now are sadly gone. Apart from the flattened structure of this group, what I also found appealing that this was a bunch of folk working together, not always in agreement, but from a cross-section of backgrounds: writers, poets, artists, teachers, printers, trade unionists, socialists, anarchists, ex-communists, anti-parliamentarians, disillusioned Labour Party members, to name but a few tags. A whole melting pot of experience and range of political backgrounds. It was really exciting. I was about the youngest there, not even 25, but I already felt at home. We employed numerous tactics and formulated various strategies in our attacks on the corrupt local council, from organising pickets outside the city chambers, public meetings, protests against privatisation, alternative cultural events, socialist heritage walks, and the distribution of a news sheet. This is one of the main remaining legacies from the group, the Glasgow Keeley. This free paper was brought out over a 3-year period from 1990 to 1993. It contained caricatures and illustrations, in-depth and analytical writing, naming and shaming of corrupt politicians, and general muckraking. Now, apart from being a general foot soldier in this group, fly posting this and that, handing out information, I also created some of the visuals for the Keeley. And these included some of the mastheads. This one, Glasgow Invents Another Lie, was based on one of the many council PR spins on attracting tourist money to the city. With a little bit of digging, we found out that logo Glasgow's Alive had been commissioned from a company owned by the previous Lord Provost, Michael Kelly, for the sum of £250,000. There's no shortage of corrupt connections. Think Commonwealth Games 2014 and another expensively commissioned logo, which was later found out to be a near carbon copy of an existing design for an arts group. Some of these Keeley graphics fed into other work. For example, I part photocopied, part screen printed cards that incorporated segments of text from Keeley articles, mixed with montaged, reappropriated imagery. These were distributed at events and meetings. Of course, after the Year of Culture, there were still plenty of dodgy deals and corruption scandals to expose. Privatisation was never far from the agenda. After local government reforms, the GDA, Glasgow's Development Agency, basically became a de facto private company that dealt with hundreds of millions of pounds annually and controlled almost every aspect of economic development in the city. It was run by an unelected business elite, bankers, accountants, millionaire funders, ex-chairman of the Tory party, right-wing economists, and the like. So, of course, we wrote about this in the Keeley, and I drew inspiration and printed posters about it too. Some of his work developed into an exhibition as well. This was a show in the Baytree Cafe in Kelvin Bridge in 1992, which is over 30 years ago now, Christ. One of Glasgow's first vegan and cooperative-run cafes. Still to this day, the best veggie burger I have ever tasted, and Julia's going to go red again. She did last time I said that. Anyway, it was my local cafe at the time, and I was happy to show work there. I used the ceiling tiles as a starting point and checkerboarded dozens of prints throughout the space. Cards and information were available too. Meanwhile, in the East End, we in the Workers' City Group also resurrected the long-lost idea of a free speech platform during May Day. This was when the celebrations of May Day still occurred in the public Glasgow Green. Local anarchists and others on the fringes of the left collaborated in this annual event. A couple of pallets, some flags and visual backdrops, a megaphone or speakers, and we were all set. Anyone with something to say, sing or rant about was welcome up on the soapbox. Believe me, if what you said was shite, you were soon heckled off. There were some great orators at this, but the red-faced council officials hid in the marquees beyond. These annual events were very popular, and it's my belief we were one of the reasons the council moved May Day out of the green. For my part, public speaking was not on my to-do list, so I happily designed, printed, painted a banner for the backdrop, documented proceedings, and handed out the most recent Keeley. And I'm so pleased that after many years of dormancy, the Keeley has resurfaced in a friendly, pocket-sized version, and the current issue even has my exhibition mentioned. I became known for producing banners and made quite a few for groups, including the Anti-Poll Tax Federation, the Glasgow Anarchists, and Clydeside Action on Asbestos, all groups I had formulated strong links to. I remember one occasion sitting in the Spirit of Revolt pub around the early 90s. I just met Tommy Gorman, having been introduced to him by Jim and Brendan from the Workers' City Group. Tommy at the time worked in the Leyland Albion car plant in Scotstoun and was a senior shop steward there. The factory was under direct threat. The next day or thereabouts, the workers were going to hold a demonstration, a picket, a walkout. Can't quite remember exactly what it was, but it was imminent. Well, alcohol assists no end in making one gallus, as we all know, and enthusiastic. So I said, Tommy, I could make you a banner, but Euan, we would need it the day after tomorrow, or words to that effect. No problem, said I. Of course, some of that was the booze talking, but some of it was a particular mindset of mine which still rings true today. If I can assist and say I will, then I usually do come up with the goods. So I scribbled the text that required on the back of a beer mat, downed my drink, wandered back to my flat. About 8 hours and a pot of coffee later, I'd sketched out design, dug out a piece of usable material, projected outline, and painted up a banner. I crashed out and let it dry as the sun came up. That night, I dropped it off to slightly bemused but very appreciative Tommy in the Clutha. Now, the banner is perhaps not the best work I've ever done, but in some ways it was one of the most fulfilling. It was not the night out in the pub that I'd planned, but for me, the experience started to really instill a fermenting idea of art as solidarity. So what is solidarity? Some anarchists would say that solidarity is the act of undertaking supportive activity towards other people, which does not come with the expectation of reward, but instead comes with a sense of mutual aid or common interest. I don't disagree. But for me as an artist, and it's just my interpretation, there are multiple and overlapping approaches to solidarity. Support, cooperation, unity, commonality, assistance, coordination, union, community, mutual aid. These are all integrated parts of solidarity as I see it. So specifically as an artist or arts worker or cultural activist, and these are all terms I've used to describe myself before. How can solidarity be developed, nurtured, and realized? 3 straightforward strands I would identify are making artwork about struggles and campaigns and issues and causes. Making artwork for struggles or campaigns or issues or causes. And the third one, making artwork with struggles or campaigns or issues or causes. Well, the first is pretty straightforward, and what I'd been doing for years prior to this, and still do, create issue-based work, making artwork about struggles or campaigns or issues or causes. This kind of work is basically commentary. It's the content of what is being made. For me, a good piece of art has both interesting form and powerful content. Not just the way it looks, but what it's saying or trying to. Though things don't always have to be obvious, oblique is sometimes healthy, giving the viewer enough information or clues to draw them into looking and then hopefully making the connections themselves. That is one aspect that is fairly unique to art. This example is a set of illustrations I was asked to do for Variant magazine in the late 90s. Here is a recurring theme in some of my work, the interchangeable nature of mainstream political parties. The mask of one leader covers the previous in a never-ending cycle. It accompanied an article by a previous Workers' City member, Billy Clark, about the Glasgow University Media Group, who have done some great work and published such books as Bad News, More Bad News, Really Bad News, and lots of others. I'm making commentary off it, but they're really strong books. I continue to make work of this nature as part of my studio practice, for want of a better term, when I get a chance. sometimes shown publicly, sometimes not. This one was submitted in response to a solidarity request to send work under the banner heading, "Do Not Forget Lebanon, July 2006, to the Freedom Theatre in the Jenin Palestinian refugee camp." Back in 1993, I was one of the co-founders of a group called Artists in Solidarity. The backbone of this was making work for struggles or campaigns. What we attempted to do was make a different kind of organisation, a loose grouping of folk who would come together when required. Here is a snippet from our press release. Artists in Solidarity is a non-aligned, non-sectarian body of artists and cultural activists who want to demonstrate their support of people engaged in some of the numerous and diverse struggles going on throughout Scotland and elsewhere. The term artists here covers the whole spectrum of people engaged in the arts. So far, writers, musicians, visual artists and actors have been involved. The artists are not organised by political activists. They organise the events themselves. Although a few of us formed this group, we wanted it to shape itself, and anyone could come together and use the title and coordinate benefit gigs or protests around a struggle. Events that I was directly involved with included support for the Albion workers, Timex workers, Stephen Lawrence Family Campaign, and the Southall Monitoring Group. Being in the public spotlight or writing have never been my strong point, so I assisted where I could. That often involved creating posters and other publicity materials for these events, and many more as the years went on. Although Artists in Solidarity never really evolved in quite the way we'd hoped, my determination and doggedness to solidarity and support has never really diminished, and to this day I'm still asked and offered to make posters for events. Over the years I've made lots and lots of posters and flyers, not just for campaigns but also for counter-cultural events as well as family, friends and neighbourhood occasions. More recently, posters for the Red and Black Clydeside Book Fair and its supported events. The third strand of art and solidarity indicated at the beginning of this section is making work with campaigns and struggles. In some ways, I feel that is the goal, being an integral part of the struggle itself, not just being an observer or some sort of assistant or commentator on the sidelines, and certainly not parachuting in with your own agenda. Now, the example I've chosen is the IWW. Fairly topical of recent. I've been a member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies as they're also known, for almost 20 years now. And the union was over 100 years old when I joined it. Now, I'm not here to persuade you to join the union. Some folk in the room I can see are members already. Some of you might be in the future. I have frequently had experience that folk involved in a group or organisation or campaign or movement or cause may ask you to join, may strenuously persuade you to join, may guilt trip you into joining. Many use different tactics to bolster their support or membership or finance or whatever. However, I believe the only thing that should convince you to get involved in anything is what the actual merits of the organisation are, and whether that is by its current or prior actions, written or oral testimony. Sure, organisationally, it may be a slower process to get people involved, but hopefully you get qualitative results rather than just weaker quantitative results. What attracted me to the IWW union was threefold. As a fairly recently turned self-employed worker, I was without a union, the previous one being the EIS. The IWW has a catchphrase, the one big union. It offers membership to all workers, which includes the unemployed, the retired, the apprentice, the student, the part-time, the full-time, the migrant, the disenfranchised, and of course, the self-employed. The premise is also that the union is run by its members, so no one is in charge telling us what to do or what line we should take. Sure, we have folk in administrative positions that we vote in from the membership, but the decisions are made by the members through a democratic delegate system. Okay, it's not perfect. We continually rewrite our constitution and rules, have arguments about the current direction we are going, and reinvent the wheel over and over again, and other teething problems. We're only 120 years young, remember, but the idea of this DIY union was and still is very appealing to me. The third reason was the preamble. Simply put, this union is a radical union dedicated to the overthrow of capitalism. The motto, abolition of the wage system, right at the top of the agenda. Another motto of the union is, everyone is an organizer. I was up for the challenge. Over the past 20 years, I have made a vast amount of wobbly graphics and designs and been heavily involved in various aspects of the union. This has included assisting fellow workers involved in struggles in a very practical way. An example of this is when I was asked to aid in creating imaginative visuals, materials for some workplace struggles. One was after a member had been sacked from the Showroom Cinema in Sheffield. After some research, I hit on the notion of responding to the cinema's recent Investment in People award they had recently received. I altered the logo and printed up a bunch of stickers and some large-scale posters and sent them down. There was a great response. Another was designing and printing picket signs for some of the striking Pizza Hut workers in the north of England. A fairly simple idea using the pizza slice shape. Closer to home, I assisted fellow workers at the Glasgow University's Crichton campus in Dumfries. Their jobs were under threat as the campus had been earmarked with closure by Muir Russell, the current principal. I printed out a large-scale P45 and Russell's name was written on it. Supportive students then heckled him in a lively demonstration and handed it to him. I also made up some equally subtle stickers, the Butcher of Crichton, which were plastered around the campus. This was a winning campaign. Even closer to home and much more recently, I was at and supporting many of the demonstrations outside the CCA where IWW members had recently been sacked from Saramago for daring to ask for improved working conditions. Now, there's a lot of information out there that will tell the true story of this, as long as you avoid the toxic bile written in the Herald and the Times and elsewhere that slanders the union and attempts to undermine workers' rights. The exact same thing is happening right now with the Unite Hospitality 13th Note workers. And some of this is referenced in the exhibition round about you when you get a chance to see it. So, you join the union, you are the union. Solidarity, unionism in action. A few years earlier, further over in the West End, in deepest, darkest Partick, I had an exhibition entitled The Thin Green Line, or How I Tried to Stop Worrying and Love Neoliberalism. You know the word I'm trying to say. The form of this show consisted of a set of 7 large-scale triptych panels and presented the notion that the all-pervasive forces of neoliberalism, say that again, are well and truly embedded in our society, from the privatization policies embodied in Thatcherism to the continued erosion of civil liberties and the sellout of the working class by new labour, with the corporate ransacking of people and planet through the unaccountable push of global capitalism. We are under continual attack. Just prior to the show, Variant magazine had been banned from some council venues in the city. This was due to the publishing of an article about the controversial creation of Culture and Sport Glasgow. This feature was based on an academic study undertaken by Rebecca Gordon-Nesbitt. Glasgow Culture and Sport Glasgow was a newly privatised wing of the City Council that is now known as Glasgow Life. This reminded me of the Worker City days, except that the stench had never really gone away. So I decided to create a new information panel for the show, which reproduced the press release from Variant. I organised a plinth from which these banned copies could be distributed. Dissent will not be tolerated, I typeset on the panel with zero irony. After this, I was asked to design the next cover of Variant, a job I took on with much enthusiasm, and use it to criticise the narrow-minded attitude of the City Council. Suppressed, deleted, censored, removed, stifled, gagged, prohibited, banned, silenced, purged. The test of democracy is freedom of criticism. I do like a good sticker or badge. The old-time American wobblies used to call the stickers they put up on railroad cars, in workplaces and street furniture silent agitators. I love that term and have ongoing plans to make multiple pieces of work that will commemorate some of these slogans and develop new ones for today's changing society. In the meantime, I have been producing various badges and stickers that I sometimes just call mini artworks. Some oblique, verging on the neoist or surrealist, others more agitprop and pure propaganda. When I first joined the IWW, I was quickly introduced to its true DIY nature when I answered a seemingly straightforward question on the email list. Does anyone know where to get badges made? Oh, that's an easy one, I thought. I stuck my hand up. I do, I replied, and I have a badge machine too. My badge machine DIY badge making skills were put to good use, and within a year, I'd been voted into a new national role as a supply depot coordinator. If this had been the army, I was a newly appointed quartermaster. I spent a number of years designing, producing, and distributing membership supplies, from flyers and bulletins to logos and stamps and graphics, and of course badges. Lots of badges. Lots and lots and lots of badges. As a wobbly, I'm often making up stickers to give out to show support to others in struggle. There are ongoing calls for assistance and solidarity, but not everyone can support everything due to many other commitments. But when I can, I do. By late 2011, the IWW Cleaners branch in London had a number of members employed by Apollo Cleaning Services, this company having just taken over from the previous contracting cleaning staff. Their clients included law firms in the city. What brought this particular struggle to head was the sacking of a member who had spoken up for a fellow worker who had complained about the firm's appalling attitude to its workers. These included ignoring TUPE legislation, which is the Transfer of Undertaking Protection of Employment, disregarding health and safety requirements put in place to protect pregnant women, and the ongoing cycle of bullying, intimidation, and abuse, the usual kind of shit. Management refused to meet with the union, so a picket was organised, not at the cleaning company offices, but in this case, one of their clients, McGregor's law firm, 5 Old Bailey. As I was going to be in London at this time, I made up hundreds of fluorescent green stickers. As I arrived at the Old Bailey, I was really excited. There was a massive crowd and lots of press photographers. Yes! However, as I got nearer, I realised my enthusiasm was misdirected because, of course, the Old Bailey, as an address, is much more famous for being the location of the Central Criminal Court, and at that exact time of my arrival, a high-profile murder case was coming out. Though 100 yards down the road, there was an equally large crowd at our picket, cleaners and their families, friends, union colleagues and supporters. Mind you, without any press coverage. Stickers were distributed and the demonstration continued. Some of us tried to persuade the press to come down, but to no avail, even though we had a ready-made tabloid headline, appalled by Apollo. The folk who should have been in the criminal courts that day were the cleaning firm. For me, size is not critical, so a sticker with a bit of text is as important as a poster with lots of information. A pin badge with a reappropriated image has equal status to a gallery filled with large montages. So to start justifying one as having more validity or standing than the other is to me an irrelevance. Though sometimes these physically small items are linked to larger pieces. For example, these beer mats were printed as multiples and part of a larger show. This dealt with surveillance and the then recently introduced Criminal Justice Bill. Why beer mats? Well, this exhibition was in a bar, at the time my local watering hole, Bar 10. Now, this next item could be interesting when I eventually submit them to the Spirit of Revolt archive, as it's based in the Mitchell Library. I can almost see the screaming Scottish scum headline already. Artist, anarchist, arson attempt. These matchbooks were fabricated as another freebie for a show. This one opened on the eve of the 1997 general election, just before New Labour got into power. As a committed anti-parliamentarian, I felt it my duty to at least highlight the notion that any changes in government were likely to be insignificant at best and a real misdirection of what democracy is. Voting changes nothing. This stance rears up every so often, usually every 4 years. Cards and stickers have been mailed out or left in various venues for folk to redistribute as they see fit. Sometimes these small subverted images would appear in mail art exhibitions all around the world, such as these caution stickers. And occasionally they would be adopted by publications, such as this first issue of the Scottish Anarchist, a new magazine from 1994, or from Variant from around the same time. Over the years, I've worked alongside Variant in many roles, from being a subject of reviews and articles to assisting with events, sales, advertising, distribution, as well as being a general dog's body and a contributor of artwork. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this publication, here is a short background. The first volume ran from 1984 to 1994, when it got its funding cut by the Scottish Arts Council. It started out as a thin, staple-bound magazine by Malcolm Dixon and set out to document and encourage new forms of artistic activity in Scotland, to discuss art in a social and political context and encourage debate on creative issues. Although it had a large and supportive community, the Arts Council Act still fell upon it. It was relaunched in 1996 in a free newspaper format by Billy Clark and Lee French, when its emphasis shifted as it engaged in the examination and critique of society and culture, drawing from the knowledge across the arts, social sciences and humanities, as an approach to creative cultural practice and as something distinct from promotional culture. By 2012, and 40 or so printed issues later, it too had been axed by the powers that be, in this case by an unsuccessful funding application to Creative Scotland, the successor of the Arts Council. The important legacy of Variant over the years cannot really be emphasised properly in the context of this talk, so I would encourage anyone not familiar with it to check out the online archive, which has every issue, both volumes in it. So, from the synopsis of a publication to the outline of a publisher. AK Press and Distribution is a non-profit, worker-owned anarchist collective. They've been producing and disseminating radical literature for 25 years, but I realise I've not updated that, so add another 6, 7 on that. So 30 odd years, 33 years, in fact. As a self-managed publisher and distributor of all decision-making, including which titles are distributed and what is published, is done collectively. Their goal is to make available radical books and other materials, titles that are published by independent presses, not the corporate giants, titles with which you can make positive change in the world. It originated from a punk rock anarchist ethos in Ramsey Canan's small Stirling bedroom, not long after publishing its first book, Terrorizing the Neighbourhood by Noam Chomsky, whom Ramsey first met at that seminal self-determination power event in Govan. It expanded, moved to Edinburgh, further expanded with connections in London and Dean Plant, San Francisco and beyond. Though it still has a solid base in Edinburgh where Lex, an original collective member, still works, and occasionally past members get in touch and get involved. People like Andy and Michael and Molly, to name but a few. I also got involved with AK in the early 90s. Though after a very short stint as a member of the collective, I withdrew, preferring to have more flexibility to work across many different areas and projects. However, my relationship with AK was really just starting. Over the years or so, I have helped out in many different ways and also been employed as an artist, making various publicity materials, designing book covers, typesetting publications, and taking point on the construction of the annual catalogue. I was occasionally referred to as AK's hired gun, and I have the t-shirt to prove it. These next 3 book design covers are what I later came to describe as my Dole trilogy. The majority of the work done on them was while I was unemployed and on benefits in the 90s. It was a nod to all my fellow skivers, dodgers, benefit cheats and Dole scum, as we were often referred to by the media and politicians. This was my own personal solidarity in the form of not only earning a few extra quid while out of work, but also making a comment on the situation by pushing these visuals into the public realm. This one for Jim Ferguson's book, The Art of Catching a Bus, used a job centre colour scheme at the time, navy, blue and bright yellow. The reworking of the logo has the figure escaping the job club, only to stand on the social security man trap. This was linked to a t-shirt design done around the same time. State control screws you up. Yes, it really does. Housing Benefit Hill by C.J. Stone utilised the design and colour scheme of the Housing Benefit mail I used to get through my letterbox of my flat. However, a Pantone printing error meant the colour came out a bit off and not the envelope tone I'd planned for, so nobody really got it. The first two books were AK Press books. The third was a commission from the publisher Secker and Warburg to do the cover for the James Kelman book, How Late It Was, How Late. This would later go on to win the Booker Prize, though through under unbelievable controversy, and worth looking it up if you don't know about it. Anyway, the publishing company didn't like the colour scheme and didn't understand the relevance. It was taken from my Dole card at the time, which some of you may recognise, maybe not. Even though the publishers didn't use the full design, they took bits of it, they still paid me handsomely, and I used the dough to buy my first ever computer. Typography and Photoshop, here I come. No more bloody letter set. And only some of you will get that joke. If you know what letter set is, if you don't, it's lost. It's my best joke, it's my only joke. I've also worked on designs for other publishers and organisations over the years. These are some of many of the works I've done for the Anarchist Federation. They are part of a thematically linked set of pamphlet works, some reprints of classic texts and others exciting new works by members of AFED. However, I was not just being an artist or designer with my connection to publications and publishing, I was also becoming an organiser. My first foray into book events was helping to coordinate, alongside Keith Miller and others, a free university independent book fair in 1992, in the same venue but 2 years after the Chomsky event that I've mentioned a couple of times now. It was a showcase for small publications and an overwhelming success. A few years later, a few of us got together to build another book fair. We had been invited by John LaRose to be part of the expansion of the International Book Fair of Radical Black and Third World Books. Based in London and then in its 11th year, John was the main coordinator for this book fair, as well as being the founder of the Caribbean Artist Movement, New Beacon Books, and the George Padmore Institute. We were in good company. And when I say we, it was me and Jim Kelman, Ramsey from AK, Malcolm from Variant, but not just us white working class boys, also a good few others. Toloshan, who had been one of the Bradford 12 back in the 80s, Satva from SCARF, the Scottish Campaign Against Racism and Fascism, and Amar, an Iraqi dissident hiding out in Glasgow, and a good few others too who wish not to be named for multiple reasons. We coordinated two main book fair events over the next 3 years with many side meetings and pre-events. Poet Tom Leonard made gallons of lentil soup for these book fairs, and exiled writer Kamal Kadura taught me how to make fou madame, a garlicky fava bean stew. It was another exciting time of my life. We hosted talks and screenings and concerts and book launches around themes such as fundamentalism and women's resistance, radical publishing, racism in education, and racist violence and self-defense, to name but a few. I met dozens of amazing activists and artists through John LaRose, folk like Jayoti Gresh and Linton Kwesi Johnson. Got introduced to the writings of June Jordan. There was Gus John, Suresh Grover, Ballygill, Roxy Harris, Mandla Langa. I recall sitting up late in Mandla's South London flat, drinking beer, and being told stories of when he ran security for Nelson Mandela and the ANC. I later became friends with Neville Lawrence, though through circumstances that should never have happened. My eyes were further pinned open to the racist abuse of my fellow humans were experiencing, and it's not really stopped. This underlying theme of self-defense is no offense became the background to another exhibition of mine and a side event for the 1995 book fair, where it showcased a set of screen-printed works using mocked-up Cluedo cards, fictional quotes, and images of police brutality. I became involved in many aspects of publicity, design, print, and distribution, and also agreed to have my landline phone number and address as the main publicity contact. This was at a time before mobile phones, before email, before websites, before any social media. As some of the group did not even have a landline or any other means of communication, at the end of each planning meeting, we would all have to agree a time, a date, and a venue for the next meeting, and adhere to it like glue. John LaRose once said it only takes 2 people to start a revolution. For me, that was mind-blowing, and after I'd unpacked it, such common sense. The book fairs, their participants, and all this amazing source material were just what I required to formulate my ideas and give me fresh inspiration to make new work. The majority, if not all, my standalone artworks are galvanized and influenced by research and reading. and it's these book fairs that started to assist that process. These montage works have been shown in various venues, including the London Anarchist Book Fair in 2004. They've also been published as a set of cards titled The Circus of Death. Some of the acts of aggression and exploitation that make up the modern-day imperialism of the United States and its allies, i.e. us. Merging archetypes of Western war films along with stereotypes of evil, mixing symbolism and graphic texts. More recurring themes in some of my montage-based work. Human rights activist and freelance journalist Eva Jaziewicz, who talked at a wee anti-war forum in Kinning Park Complex in 2004, inspired me to make this piece of work. Based on some of her writings on the reconstruction of post-war Iraq and other research I've followed up on. It takes the form of a spot the difference picture to comment on the appalling US government executive orders of 2003, which legalized the theft of Iraqi funds and property and declared Iraqi oil to be the sole responsibility of US corporations. Not only were the Iraqi people illegally bombed, they had to pay for it too. The piece was printed and distributed as an insert variant the year after. Going back a few years, I experimented with another way of using written source material in my work. In 1999, I was offered a solo exhibition in street level gallery in the east end of the city. In the main space, I created a large-scale sculptural installation with projections and prints. In the side gallery, I hung reproductions from a recently published set of cards. However, the third part of this show was a mini bookshop. What I negotiated with the gallery was to temporarily remove all the art journals, the glossy magazines, the art and photography books. In their place, I installed a temporary bookshop with a whole range of titles, some of which I utilised for my research in creating the other artworks in the gallery. For me, it was like a set of footnotes, a live bibliography to the work on show elsewhere in the space. The next piece of work I'm going to show you is the RIB, Glasgow's Radical Independent Book Fair project. This was started in 2006 by myself, Lee from Variant, and Michael Harris from AK Press. Though in a short time it became something I drove on mainly myself. It started for a few different reasons, though mainly as a response to the fact that there were no longer any independent, let alone radical bookshops in Glasgow at that time. It became a distribution hub for Variants, had dozens of titles from AK, and I used it to punt my numerous artworks, free cards, stickers, and a range of t-shirts. Prior to then, I had a fair amount of experience of organising book fair events, but also being behind stalls at anarchist, small press, and independent book fairs, often with Malcolm from Variant. Yes, that is a very young Malcolm and a very young Euan from many years ago, when we were 12 or something like that, by the looks of it. With a small amount of dedicated stock, we would occasionally be disheartened about lack of interest, or in some cases, lack of people, full stop. So, the RIB also developed as an alternative type of book fair event, not an annual hit or miss show, but a number of smaller events spaced out throughout the year. Here's one of the last press releases I wrote. The RIB acted as a support structure for a number of individuals and groups who produce publications, information, and materials for sale, view, and free distribution. With the ideas of mutual aid and solidarity at its forefront, this long-term project played an important part in helping to fill the gap left by the lack of alternative bookshops in Glasgow. As well as stocking various books, pamphlets, and other printed matter for sale from various publishers in an eclectic mix, the project stalls always contained a multitude of free items and occasionally a mini library of documentaries and news sheets, as well as a book swap box. The scale of the RIB varied depending on the event it was hosting or supporting, from a pop-up box in a pub to a table at a talk to a number of trestles in a small hall. The project was self-financed by the participants and the goodwill of its friends. No corporate or public funding was involved, and no one took a wage. It was never party politically aligned and was autonomous from other organisations. The project was more than just an occasional bookshop and travelling bookstall. It was also a temporary library and a meeting point for discussion, distribution, and ideas. I had stall events in places as far apart as Easter House and GFT, Tory Glen and Nice and Sleazy. I used to love Sunday afternoon punk gigs downstairs in Sleazy's. Music so loud and so near, my teeth would tingle, and attempting to explain to young punks what the camcorder gorillas really were. It was no secret that I was an artist, and on occasion I would show some artwork if the context was right. This would usually be at Document, the human rights documentary film festival that occurred in October every year. Sneaking some uncurated art into the CCA also felt kind of good. Showing smaller prints of bigger artworks or big print versions of artworks. I created this lightbox piece specifically for Document in 2010. This work was a response to the report, One Death Too Many, by IWW construction workers and whistleblowers on the 2012 Olympic site in London. A damning indictment on working conditions, tame cat unionism, blacklists and corporate manslaughter. And of course the report was available for free on the nearby RIB tables. Is the actual RIB project art or an artwork? I wouldn't definitively say so, and certainly never and don't refer to it that way. However, if folk wanted to view it that way, I really didn't have an issue, especially if it meant that these important materials got seen and distributed in venues that would not normally be available in. It's certainly what I would call a solidarity project, and a fairly big one at that. Its duration was exactly 10 years, October 2006 to October 2016. That same year, the Edinburgh Independent Radical Book Fair closed its doors, which Elaine and Tuloshin, we've mentioned already, from Word Power Bookshops, had been running for 20 years up to that point. But I'm optimistic, as II Books and the CSA have a lot of radical reading materials now, as do Carlton Books in the East End, and in the West End, there is now the Anti-Racist Community Library. Last chapter, last lap, nearly done, wherever. Now, I make no apologies for the core of this talk and presentation being about me and the work I've done as an individual artist. If I don't talk for myself, I don't expect anyone else to. However, this is not a podium for me to present my work. It's some special, unique case study. Well, it's certainly not meant to be. Though, if it inspires someone or anyone to get more involved with struggles and campaigns, then job done. I'd rather see myself as a cog in the wheel of a wider movement, an occasional spanner in the works, and a thorn in the side of capitalism. Artists are often seen as egotistical people, but that's just a kind of byproduct of putting yourself in the spotlight, showing work in public spaces or situations. With the continual rise of the pseudo-celebrity and new variations of Andy Warhol's famous line, in the future, everyone will be world famous for 15 minutes. Or in the future, everyone will be anonymous for 15 minutes. It still sort of seems that the measure of success in the visual arts is by how well known you are, and the more well known, the more opportunities avail themselves. Hype up the artist, and the almost secondary artwork will fall into line behind. A sort of perpetual cycle that I was not willing to enter into all these years ago. However, there is a healthy tradition of breaking this mold. The use of pseudonyms, aliases, or anonymity, the idea of multiple names, or some artists choose to work in pairs, or groups, or in a collective manner. I have a dual approach, or multiple approach to this situation. In 1990, yes, that is a kind of year zero for me, I started to use the name Angry Press Artworks, that became shortened to Angry Artworks in time. I would use this to disguise my identity, or at least take away from the notion of the individual artist as sole producer and identifiable author. However, I have used other labels as well, have gone completely anonymous and not attributed to my work at all, and I've also been quite happy to be credited, even in some instances where a sort of alternative tradition dictates anonymity. I've used my name. For me, some of that is about standing up and being counted, not being afraid to put a face or a name to a set of principles or an ethical viewpoint. The majority of the works and images shown in the section before, all the images and badges and stickers, were all produced anonymously, I'm losing it, or under the term Angry Artworks, or at least when they were shown in the context within my control, did not have my name attached to them. This early image and slogan, media disinformation distortion, has been reproduced thousands of times as a sticker, a badge, a t-shirt, and various prints, and I occasionally see it popping up in the internet now and again to come back to me, haunt me. Now, you might just have noticed that some of the work I've shown you tonight seems kind of familiar. No, it's not because it's famous or infamous or been seen before, perhaps, but because I occasionally employ a method of production called detournement. And like all good French words, this is no direct English translation. Developed by the Letterist International and then Situationists, this basically translates as deflection, diversion, rerouting, distortion, misuse, misappropriation, hijacking, or otherwise turning something aside from its normal course or purpose, but also turning expressions of the capitalist system against itself. Whether that be Creative Scotland, Glasgow Housing Association, or Investors in People, or the many, many other organisations I see as fair game. This two set of stickers are based on the McDonald's Golden Arch logo. Here, I was using the idea or the cliche or archetype that anarchists are often seen as just anti-corporations or anti-McDonald's. Not that there's anything wrong with being anti-McDonald's. Think exploitative work practices, animal cruelty, a dodgy environmental track record, unhealthy food, and that creepy clown Ronald McFucking Donald, to name but a few. But of course, anarchists and anarchism is much more than taking a stand against nasty multinationals and having an anti-capitalist standpoint. So my parody of fast food slogans is used to articulate and promote some anarchist ideas, actioning issues, altering impressions, abandoning institutions, abolishing ideology, assessing information, attacking illusions. You might even be sitting next to an anarchist. This piece was developed primarily as a t-shirt, though it has been produced as a set of badges too. It's taken from the TA Territorial Army logo. But rather than just an obvious criticism of the armed forces or an overt attack on the continual militarization of this country, it instead rebrands it as a personal commentary. In some ways, I saw this as a kind of alternative text-based self-portrait. Alternative teenager, anarchist talker, abstract teacher, art thug, abnormal tourist, alleged traitor, angry thinker. When I went to get these printed up as t-shirts in the factory I used to use, I had a different colour in mind for the shirt, but the guy, John, who works there, every time I do this talk, I change the guy's name because I can't remember his name. So last time it was Mark, before that was Paul. One of these days I'll get it right. But the guy, John, whoever his name is, who works there and who have not been there for a while, and whom I've dealt with for years at the time, quite likes my work and suggested this colour instead, this Kelly green. His reasoning: they had just recently printed up garments for the actual TA, and this was the green they used. So it would make the shirts even more pertinent. This next set of detoured images started as a t-shirt design, developed into a set of badges, were published as a card, then were generated as details for a set of collages made for an exhibition, some of which also became printed cards, further developed into another exhibition and a piece for the 13th Note bar window, and have also appeared in a journal as well. It's this kind of replication, repetition, reuse, reappropriation, and reproduction of imagery that is another core element of my work. When I was at art school, I got interested in making performance art and installation work, partly because it was temporary and transient in nature. It only existed for a short time. And although they were unique things in their own way, because they only existed afterwards in memory or documentation, they could not be owned, sold, or become anyone's property. But if we look into that world, that's not actually true, unfortunately, any longer. As I developed this notion of not wanting any of my art to become commodity that only a privileged few could own, I simultaneously travelled the path of both not selling anything and looking at ways of making work that could be duplicated and available for all, while still maintaining an interesting aesthetic. This brought me initially to photocopy duplication, commercial printing, then screen printing, and finally digital photo manipulation and various print outputs from this. Of course, there are some contradictions and conflicts within all of this, but I still try to make work that's formally interesting, content-driven, and egalitarian. I hope I've shown you that art as solidarity comes in all shapes and sizes and needn't be explicit, but that it also includes art practice as solidarity, and that the artist has a role to play and important decisions to make. Because, of course, there are, of course, other elements to solidarity, not making work, for example, boycotting corporate-supported events like BP sponsor shows, refusing to take funding from certain organisations, not exhibiting in or supporting galleries that have connections to, say, arms dealers. These are just a fraction of the neoliberal tendencies you have to be wary of in the arts. However, I'd like to end on a more optimistic note. I'm still producing, still organising, still supporting, still making badges, though with a little bit of help from some new friends and solidarity activists. I hope this talk's been informative for some of you and perhaps inspiring for others. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to help me stack the chairs afterwards as I go back to being a silent agitator.